This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Everyone likes to pretend they don't need marketing. Somehow or another, everyone will just find us and we don't have to lift a finger. Well, guess what? That's not how the world works. We need people like my guest today. My guest today, Brennan Dunn, understands a very niche part of marketing. A niche but very important part of marketing. That's email marketing. This is Brennan's second appearance on the show. I always enjoyed chatting with him. He brings a unique perspective because I got to tell you, email is my lifeblood. It's probably your lifeblood. But we think, oh, Facebook and Twitter and all these other things. No, it's email. It's always been email. And it looks like it's always going to be email. There's reasons for this. Brennan gets into it. And there are pros and cons, which Brennan also gets into. Without any further delay, let's jump right in with my guest today and discuss his new book, This is Personal, The Art of Delivering the Right Email at the Right Time. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Brennan Dunn. That's cool. You've done though, man. Great shift, like me, in a way. Probably never expected to be living where you're living.
No, I did not expect to be living in the UK, but to be honest, I really do enjoy it. I don't even own a car here, which as proof of what I'm used to is unheard of, but I just walk everywhere. I walk to the supermarket, walk to the gym, walk to the cinema, pubs, wherever. And if I need to go farther, I get on a train. It's pretty incredible. And also it's nice being so close to Europe. My equivalent of flying from Norfolk to Atlanta is here to Paris.
I spent my last semester in grad school in London, and if I was not a poor grad student, I never would have left.
It's an amazing city.
But the convenience you just described, I also find where I live too. I don't own a car and I walk everywhere. I get it. And now here I am down at Southern Shores. To go anywhere, it's a drive of 10 minutes minimum, 30 minutes just to go to a restaurant or something.
Well, we lived, first house Laura and I got in Virginia Beach was in proper suburbs, which she'd never experienced. And at first she thought, I think she almost had a bit of a Truman Show idea. Oh, it'll be really nice and perfect. But then her needing to get milk and walking round trip an hour to the closest 7-Eleven.
That's not fun. It's really not. And you don't realize it till you come back here and you're just like, oh my God, how much time am I wasting during my day?
Oh, I know.
You don't get other stuff done. And even if the other stuff is just, let's, for example, if you're spending 3 hours of your day doing errands in a car, it's a little bit harder to sit down and say, let's write a book.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's draining, I think. I love being a pedestrian here because half the time I'm walking on a secluded path with no cars around, so I don't need to worry about getting hit. And you could just think, you're not thinking of hitting another car or anything like that. You're clocking in the steps. It's great. I would really struggle, I think, to go back to the old way.
So now I do the same thing in terms of walking, but I am walking amongst motorbikes and cars that most people think are probably going to hit them, but they won't hit you. So I'm texting and walking and talking in the midst of all that chaos. I have the same experience as you. It just doesn't look like to most people that it's safe, but it actually is.
To a Westerner, you're always a bit confused by how it's seemingly chaotic. I watch a guy from New Zealand who lives in India, and whenever I see him walking around, wherever he is, Delhi, I'm just like, how are you not dead? Just all the motorbikes and stuff. Yeah, it's wild.
Nobody wants to kill you really in that part of the world. Maybe some places, but I find no one wants to kill you. They're just trying to get to where they're trying to get. And if you go with the flow, you go with the flow and you get there. So
you learn the system.
So listen, I got to tell you, the perfect conversation for me at this point in my life, maybe at the first point in my life where I met you, it always comes back to freaking email. It always comes back to freaking email. I still remember my first email list server in my house in the late 90s and watching people on my Mac laptop sign up because I had a T1 connection to the house. And you could just see them signing up. And it was the coolest damn thing because you knew, even though I didn't phrase it like you phrase things, I knew there was something, I'm stealing a word from you. I knew there was something personal about the fact that they had found their way to my email list. I could see them signing up and then I would send them something.
Some people would leave. They didn't like me, whatever, but a lot of people would stay. And the only reason I'm talking to you today is because of email.
The thing that won't go away.
Yeah. But it's funny, not many people really say that, or they're not talking about it. Are you the only guy that's actually writing a book about email right now? I don't think most people think of it as an option, but it's the most important option in my world.
It's one of those things I think everyone's been trying for years to find a way to kill off email. And not to get too conspiracy theorist, and I know you and I can get that way, but the powers that be sometimes like the idea that other platforms like Twitter or what is now X or Facebook or Instagram or whatever, they're all centralized. They can say, oh, we are cutting off Mike's ability to reach anyone who's intentionally sought out to follow him. Or they could throttle you and say, well, we're going to make it so the messages you send to your audience are not as visible. Whereas email is and has always been and will always be decentralized. No one owns it. It's peer-to-peer. That's, I think, why it's not probably being as talked about, because it is such an old technology. It's more than 50 years old. People want new things. They want something that is seemingly architected better. But at the end of the day, like you, I probably spend most of my day, at least professionally, in my inbox doing stuff.
The most important stuff comes to the inbox usually.
Exactly. There's newsletters, but there's also about scheduling this interview. There's customers, there's clients, there's everyone else in between. It's where work happens. I'm very bullish on email. I don't think it's going away. And I think it has a lot of unique advantages over things like social media that aren't really talked about that often.
Let me keep you at the conspiracy theory part for a second and just pick your mind. I don't know if you were really going there with this thinking, but let's say if you do something bad that the powers that be don't like, if you are a Gmail person, I guess you could lose your Gmail.
You could, but let's say if you had your email address as mike@gmail.com, yeah, they can acquire that because the Mike at the beginning is the user and the @gmail.com is the server. I have brennandunn.com. So that's currently hooked up to Google Apps or Gmail effectively. But if they kick me off, I could spin up my own mail server. I could move to somebody else. It goes with my domain name. I might be kicked off technically Gmail's webmail, but I can move it to whatever I want.
And yet, look, you and I are not doing anything that's going to get us kicked off Google at the moment. Maybe we will do something later on in life, but it's a fair point because look, we've all seen what's happened. Maybe things right now led by Elon Musk feel more open right now, and perhaps they are. But we all know during COVID, things were not so open and the powers that be were putting their thumb on the scale in terms of communication. And if people think that can't happen again, what are they smoking?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not even, I think, the binary aspect. Yeah, you could say they shut off, say, Trump from Twitter back then. But there's also what is commonly called shadow banning.
They shut a lot of people off.
Yeah, exactly. But he's the big guy. But there's also the idea of shadow banning where your messages aren't nearly as, you might think you're tweeting, you might think you're posting on, say, Facebook, but your reach becomes severely limited, even though you might have millions of followers. I think it's just one of these things, at least with an email, it's portable. If my email list is effectively a CSV file that I can move around to different email platforms if I need to. But what I ultimately know is if I send an email to 10,000 people, 10,000 people are receiving my email. There's no throttling happening centrally or anything like that, which we do know that happens with social platforms. I like email because I do own it. It is something, it is an asset that you do know you own. And obviously, different email providers can keep you from being a customer of theirs. But at the end of the day, like I mentioned, it is truly peer-to-peer. If I email you, it is a peer-to-peer handshake that occurs between my mail server and your mail server. There's no one in between.
I like when you bring up the 10,000 emails and people could say, well, maybe I got 10,000 followers or something. And you send out a message and people might be trying to make comparisons and whatnot. But at least with email, you really can, if you send a message out, there are ways, and this gets into your world, frankly, is the ways to bring people in. You send out 10,000 emails. Are they going to open it? Are they going to read it? If they do read it, are they going to take action? This is ultimately Entrepreneurism 101. And it is really where you have spent a significant part of your life trying to optimize and figure out how to best do that simple sounding little process. It sounds simple. It's not simple.
No, it's not simple. And to extend where you were going with that, it's also, when you think of email, it is one-to-one, like I've been saying. And that actually gives us a lot of really unique advantages that we can't get in other platforms. I can't go into LinkedIn today and say, I want to post a new message and I only want people named Mike who happen to right now be in the southeast of the US or something to see this message. You can't really do that. Whereas with email, You can attach any data you want. I can say you're in this industry, this is your job role, this is your company size, you like blue, whatever it might be. I can enrich what I know about you with that. And then pretty much every email marketing platform these days can send segmented, targeted email campaigns. So you can do a lot of really interesting things, as you were just saying about the conversion element, that if I want to launch a product on Twitter, I'm saying the same broadcast billboard style messages to everyone. But if I did it over email, I could say, hey, Mike, you're in finance. So here's why I think you need this book. Whereas somebody else in e-commerce might get a different reason for wanting the book. And so there's so many interesting things you can do when you really get into email being its unique, its own entity that's not just another distribution channel like Twitter or LinkedIn or something like that.
I actually would say, at least in my experience right now, Twitter has usefulness. Twitter feels alive. Now, it's not going to do all the things that you and I are talking about when it comes to email. However, if I was to contrast that to LinkedIn, now maybe you're going to tell me you have some great way to use LinkedIn. For the life of me, I'm not sure why LinkedIn's even a company. I guess if you are just constantly changing jobs, there's some benefit to finding the next job working for the man. But I have no earthly idea what to do with LinkedIn, and I don't even attempt to do anything with LinkedIn except to log in like every 3 months and accept the invites from people that want to connect with me. I don't even know why I do that anymore, but there's thousands and thousands of these connections. I don't know what the hell the point of it is. You're going to tell me, Mike, there's some point to this.
No, well, funny enough, I felt exactly like you do up until about 2 months ago. When I sold my agency 10 years ago, I told myself that 2 things would happen. First off, I'd never own another business card. And second, I'll never log into LinkedIn again. That was the 2. I'm now no longer doing client work. I'm now doing online products. So I'm done with those 2 things. But I think a lot of the issues with Twitter recently, while Elon's done plenty of good things with the acquisition, it has been very much biased towards, I don't know if meme accounts is the right way of putting it, but accounts that on this new For You tab that are not people you follow, but are people who have sufficiently gamified the way that they post so that they're the ones dominating people's timelines. It's not necessarily the people I follow.
Yeah, I see that shit all the time. Not even people I follow, they're everywhere.
Exactly. You don't even know who they are, but they're showing up, which is great for them. It's great for them using Twitter as a distribution platform for what they want to get across. But you've seen a lot of people actually move to LinkedIn because it hasn't gone nearly as far down that rabbit hole yet. There are a lot of people, frankly, because LinkedIn is intentionally supposed to be a businessy community. Whereas when I started with Twitter, it would be like, oh, I'm taking a shit or something you tweet about or whatever. It was just, what are you doing right now? I think was the prompt that Twitter used to have.
That's an issue. So you read my mind, but I actually been seeing these damn things in the timeline and I'm thinking, well, why am I reading this stuff? Then you realize you're spending a lot of time reading something that you don't even want to read.
Yeah, exactly. Which, again, it's great for engagement, the random stuff you can push in your timeline. Again, the algorithm knows what should be there to maximize engagement. But to go back to the LinkedIn thing, I've seen a lot of people that I know and trust and are good friends with who are killing it these days on LinkedIn, doing the whole thought leader thing. They're posting infographics. They're talking about habits or businessy type things or whatever. But the big common thing that they are all doing is they're driving people to their email list. They're creating these viral posts that have the really nice infographic. But at the end of it, there's always a bit of a, if you want more, I have this free PDF report. Go here.
And I think this is how you see social media. You see social media as simply a tool to get them to your email or your website, and that's it.
It's an acquisition channel. That's exactly it. Social media to me is a distribution channel to get my message out there in front of new eyeballs. And then my goal is to get them off of the platform onto my email list.
You have this provocative statement. It's the first chapter of your book. I'm going to let you explain it. Customers are people too.
If you want to be technical, I guess they are, aren't they? The big thing that I try to get across in the book is that the MO for online marketing, the MO for online sales has been, we've gone from brochures to websites. So you used to have a brochure advertising your product, you'd pass it out, people would get it somehow. But now you've turned that into a website with an about page and a services page and a home page, which is like the front of the brochure. By definition, brochures like billboards or any broadcast media are one-to-many. If I look at your website, I'm not seeing something specific there about what I want. But if you look at it, it's a generic website. It needs to be catch-all. Email, same deal. A lot of people, when they're sending out marketing emails or promotions for their latest product, they're just doing one size fits all broadcast based messaging, which is fine. But if you go into your web browser right now, you open up, say, Facebook, you see Mike's Facebook, you see your friends, your connections, all that stuff populating that web page, basically. I see a very different Facebook. Browsers are very good at being able to show different content to different users. The argument I'm trying to make in the book is, well, what if we step back as marketers and think, in sales is one-to-one, but it's low volume, it's synchronous, it's live, it's you and me talking, it's me figuring out what are you looking for, and I try to find a way to align what I've got to fit what you need. And that's great, and it works really well because it's highly personal. A good salesperson is not just parroting off a script. They're going to adapt their core script, if you will, to fit who they're speaking with. So my thinking is, well, computers are really powerful and can do stuff like that. So why are we as marketers only letting the big guys like Amazon and Netflix and these enterprise companies do personalization, whereas we're just broadcasting? We're just saying, hey, here's what we've got. Here's why you might like it. Here's why you might not like it. Take it or leave it. That's what we're doing because we need to, because we're sending the same thing to everyone. So if you've got people from a wide spectrum of industries or who have different requirements or different benefits they care about or whatever else, your job becomes to list out all of the possible benefits. Let them wade through it. Hopefully they'll find one or two that align with their needs and hope that does the job at getting them to buy. But again, if you think about how we sell individually, we wouldn't do that. If I know that you're not going to care about these two benefits, I'm not going to mention them because that's just noise at that point. What I'm trying to get across in the book is to encourage people in charge of marketing products and services to think, how can we find some middle ground between high touch, say, highly personalized, very bespoke, very unique selling, and low touch broadcast can go out to a billion people, doesn't matter, billboard style messaging that intentionally is very generic and intentionally is very catch all. How can we find something in the middle? That quote about the customers for people too, that's what I'm trying to get across, is that if we can do at scale the human one-to-one, I give you this elk skin for 5 seashell transaction thing that is core to being human, I think we could learn a lot. And most importantly, we could also do a lot better when it comes to actually getting more people to buy.
You know, I'm down here, Southern Shores, North Carolina, and there's all kinds of beachy type shops. And I stop in an ice cream place with a friend the other day. And one nice lady in there, older lady, gives us an ice cream cone. And we end up having a long conversation. And it's just the three of us in the room having this conversation. We're not really talking about ice cream. We talk about all kinds of stuff. But that connection makes you think, well, if I ever want to get another ice cream cone again, I'll come back here. So I think of myself, I think of you, and I think in a perfect world, people that want something from Brennan or people that want something from Mike, they would enter our room, whatever our room is, general store, front door, whatever, our office or whatever, and they would walk in and we'd have that one-to-one conversation. I like to imagine at some point in the future that there will be, I don't know, I don't want it to be phony because then that won't work, but the AI Mike or the AI Brennan, because we want to have the personal conversation with every individual to the point that we can. I just like to think that that might happen in the future. In the meantime, we have emails and ability to do that right now in some capacity to personalize, but I really love the idea of the one-to-one. Look, my whole business online, my whole connection online with people is just that. It's a one-to-one type thing. And especially if someone asks me a question, how the hell do I respond? I don't respond with direct messages on Facebook and Twitter. That's a bunch of crap. I respond on email. And then for me as the business person, I keep track of that. I know exactly what conversation I've had with that person for the last day, week, year, whatever. And that is valuable as hell. That's how I run my life.
Exactly. You've got a personal CRM that you're using to, say, annotate what you know about them, what you've discussed with them. The parlance these days is you have a second brain that augments the one-to-one you already know in your head with structured data. Like, when did I last speak to them? What did they tell me? What were the takeaways from that conversation, that thing? And again, any decent sales team is going to do exactly that. Every sales team has a CRM where they have contacts and they say, okay, here's who we've contacted, what we know about them. If a salesperson calls you and says, so Mike, how are things in Vietnam or something? You know, they're just reading off the CRM. The CRM says location, Vietnam. I don't think any of us are surprised by that. But It's one of those things. It does work because we all crave that personal connection, even if it's manufactured. We all want to know that they are listening to what we're saying. They are taking into account the cues that we're giving them. I think the big fear that I've seen when I talk about this with people is that, do you remember that scene in Minority Report where they can't escape the personalized ads that are everywhere? I think they're walking through like a subway or something, and it's just these floating projector style videos where it's basically a commercial made for that person, where they know everything about you. They have all this data about you. So they're able to, I guess this would be AI, generate a commercial that is specific to you. Maybe it has people you know in it. Maybe it has things that they know you're going to resonate with. And I think that's the fear, but it's already happening. Royal Caribbean, you go to their website. Depending on how you got to their website, what they know about you, what you've done before, you're going to see different pictures. What we call the hero, the thing at the top of the website, the big image. That's going to change depending on what they think is going to resonate best with you. Likewise, Netflix, we all know they personalize the results we see for films, but a lot of people don't know they actually change the covers. If they know that I love everything Robert De Niro does, if he's in a new movie, that movie's cover for me is probably going to have him on it. Whereas for somebody else, it might have a different actor in the film. And I think that's the thing where it obviously makes sense on a deep human level why that works. But until recently, I think the consensus has been to do that. You need armies of engineers coding and building all this custom stuff and doing data science-y type things. But the fact of the matter is, I think for most of us, we don't need to do that. All we need to do is come up with a way to, at scale, get more than just a name and an email address when somebody joins your email list, find out a bit about why are they joining, what stage are they at, what are they looking for help with, whatever makes sense for you. And then use that information to then curate different messages to them. This could be different informational content. It could be different case studies you send them, because the guy who works in construction does not care at all if you've helped governments or something. They're going to want to know, how do you help somebody like me, a owner of a construction company? And that's the thing that if we can start to think, okay, we do this already one-to-one. What can we do in our scalable marketing, email marketing, or hell, even website stuff to learn about people? We'd call that segment people, and then personalize what they get from us. If they get more relevant messages from us, they're probably more likely to keep listening. If they tune in longer, they're more likely to buy when we tell them to buy. And that's basically it. How can we be a little more niche without actually having to niche the whole thing? In your case, with trend following and stuff, how do you make it so you presumably have different types of people, like amateur investors all the way up to institutional investors who follow your stuff? Got people with different goals, people with different needs. If you were to talk to a amateur investor who, I don't know, I'm BSing here, but wants to buy heavy metals and they want to apply the trend following approach to that. If you were to talk to them at a conference, say at an after party, how would you describe your book to them differently than you would the next guy who's big institutional investor at a fund or something?
Very differently.
Yeah, exactly. But even though the book might be able to help them both equally.
I got to share with you a couple things on email here, and I'll just let you comment and rip me apart and add context and add more. One of the things that I've done going back to, let's say, 1996 is I respond to all emails. And that's been a very valuable procedure, routine for me. I also, if I send something out on an email list, I'll say, hey, respond to this if you have a question or something. And it's remarkable how many people respond and they'll ask me a question and then I give an answer and they're like, I can't believe you responded. Unbelievable. There's so little personalization out there. Every week, somebody tells me they're shocked that I actually responded to their email.
Yeah, I can tell you too that you doing that also, a lot of people don't know this, it helps with your deliverability of your future newsletters, because email servers look at responses as, hey, this is a real email. I don't respond to Amazon delivery notification emails, but I do respond to emails from Mike. That does send a strong signal to email platforms that you're the real deal, which is going to help you then get more into the primary inbox or out of the spam or whatever for a lot of your recipients.
I'll share something else with you too and let you comment on it. I have, at various stages, when you do this for so long, you develop bad habits on some of the emails that send out, the automated emails. Maybe they're too brief, or maybe it becomes just basic information. And maybe I'm just updating people with a new podcast, boring. Recently, I don't know what, actually, I do know what inspired me. Ryan Holiday's assistant. I don't know who this guy was. His name is Billy Oppenheimer. I don't know anything about him. And I started receiving some of his emails, and they're very motivational, little stories, Tom Hanks or Matt Damon or whoever found their way through success or some lesson or story or something. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. It's interesting to me. And I thought, well, gosh, of course, I know this information in the trend following world. Crazy. Now, this information is already buried in my books. It's buried on my website. It's buried in my podcast. But here I'm dealing with email. So why have I gotten lazy to where I'm not sharing these nuggets and stories in email? I started doing that recently, again, after a long delay, adding little stories about trend following and stuff to the email. The email is getting a little bit longer, but more to read. I do something like this. I get the response from a guy recently. He's like, look, I don't listen to your podcast. I don't listen to anybody's podcast, but I really like that you've changed your emails to give me little stories that I can read and bits of information that I can understand. It's just so fascinating. You can't treat every channel the same. You have to put the work in and you have to do it. And then when you do that, you find out something interesting. It's very useful.
What are you finding useful? Just the replies or?
Yeah, the replies. You know, people are engaged. They're engaged in the sense that I enjoy seeing Billy Oppenheimer's email that comes in that shares these little stories with me. Well, why should I not be sharing these little stories in my email list? I share them on my podcast. I share them in my books, but email's a different channel. You have to go the extra mile for each channel. You can't just dial it in.
I agree. And I think to your point about the replies and how many you've been getting, to be honest, it's one of these things where the emails you're sending to your list are sandwiched between the Amazon delivery notification email and the person inviting them to lunch. So you could be smack in between those two emails. The inbox is busy, and it's busy with different degrees of things that need to be done to each email. I know if I get an Amazon notification email, it's a machine that sent it to me. I can ignore it. I can get rid of it, just archive it. Whereas when it's you asking me to go on the show, that's a bit different. That's a human who's saying, hey, I want something of you. Let's do something together. We can, when it comes to the way we write our emails, you can absolutely, again, this gets into the whole human psychology thing. The more your emails seem like the Mike asking Brennan something and less like the Amazon notification, the more performant they're generally going to be. And they're more likely they're going to get read. And they're more likely that if you do things like, hey, tap reply, because every email client has a built-in reply mechanism, tap reply and share with me something about, did what I had to say today resonate with you? And if so, how? And I've seen so many people, especially in the professional services end of things, use email, this broadcast mechanism, to generate sales discussions. Because if you build up a decent audience and you're sharing stories, maybe client stories, or, well, I've got a friend who, when you get into a discussion with a potential client, there's questions that come up and doubts. And, well, what if I did that instead of this? He just shares all of that, obviously anonymized, to his list. He allows people who are still not yet ready to become a client to get into how he does things with his clients. And that's how he gets work. People just get to the point where they're like, oh, finally, after being on your list for 4 months and hearing this, I now know what I've needed to know, and I'm now ready to take that next step. And then they just reply to him, and all of his deals come inbound through just people replying to his newsletter. It's brilliant. It makes perfect sense. And the benefit is it doesn't matter if he's sending it to one guy or 10,000. It's the same amount of effort for him. He writes the email, and it just has these great compounding effects.
4 months is so rank amateur. I've had 2 clients that I can recall specifically who told me, Mike, I've been following and listening to you for 8 years. I finally decided to make a substantial purchase. I know I've told you that before. 8 years, 2 of them. I don't know where they got the 8 years from, but.
But I think that's the thing. You would never call one of these would-bes for 8 years straight with no expectation coming out of it. You wouldn't meet for coffee once a week with these people with the hope that 8 years later they're going to buy from you. I think when you're giving up your time, it's a bit of a shit or get off the pot mentality. But if you're doing things at scale and you're saying, hey, when I used to do a lot of consulting work, I would go to networking events and I would get people's info and I'd add them to my email list. And then I just send out, I talked about building web apps and I talked about this and talked about that. I'd even do things because it was a local email list. I'd say, whenever I shipped a new client project, first round's on me. Let's meet at this bar. Come on out. People love to get drunk, so they would come out for the free drink. And it was great because here's all these people celebrating my team's ability to deliver business value for one of our clients. That was our whole attitude too. We've been doing email. I've been doing email like this for about 15 years now. Way early on, it was very unsophisticated, very much just MailChimp and blast it out to the local email list. But these days, you see in the book, I'm trying to think, okay, well, I learned a lot when I had that agency about how people buy. There was no add to cart button. It was always a discussion that warranted a custom proposal. And in that proposal, I would be highly specific. I'd be highly personal. So again, can we meet somewhere in between marketing and sales and find a middle ground that is more performant, but also super scalable?
The audience is going to have to go dig in and really dive into the nitty gritty of your book. But let me ask a question about the idea that you described. Here's the inbox, and you've got the invite from the friend for lunch, and you've got the Amazon notifications and all that stuff. And then here comes either my email or your email. Give people a practical way to understand what I'm about to ask. You could give an answer that probably goes on for a day, but just to bring them into some of the basic thinking, because the first step is the open. And to get the open, the first step is, what are you seeing in the subject line? How do you bring people in? Again, they're going to have to go dig into your world and really understand that it's not a simple question with not a simple answer. But how do you start to bring people into the idea of a subject heading, given all the competition for our eyeballs?
It's a very good question. I think a lot of people put a lot of focus on the all-important subject, and for right reason. But I think ultimately what matters most is not just the subject, but also the sender's name. Because if you have a reputation of every time they read your email, it is a worthwhile experience. They're not just getting sold stuff. They're not just getting pitched. They're learning something new. They're thinking after they read what you have to send to them. They're thinking through what you shared with them. But obviously, subjects do matter, because let me explain it this way. You know what the idea of black hat and white hat is, where there's some things that can be done nefariously, but are wildly successful, but then other things that are done more vanilla, if you will. And where I'm getting with this is that I've seen a lot of email marketers do things like they'll have the subject of the email be RE colon. Actually, politicians do this all the time. There's an email from a politician that I got because somehow I think I donated to Ron Paul years ago. Now I'm on everyone's email list. I got an email once where it was a fake generated email that had my name, and then above it, it had some random guy like John Smith, and below it, Susan, whoever. And it's like, Susan had donated 50, John Smith had donated 100. There's a question mark next to my name. The candidate is saying, I was reviewing our records, and for some reason, I couldn't find your donation or something. And I think the email subject was something like, Brennan, comma, where are you? Or something very, we could call that link bait. You have no idea what's going to be in that email. Is it actually a real human sending it to me, or is it a broadcast marketing campaign? So I think you absolutely do nefarious things like RE colon, and then something that makes it look like this is part of an ongoing mail thread that you have. You see this a lot where people will send a marketing email, and then a few days later, they'll send the same thing, and they'll preface the subject with the RE and be like, hey, Mike, wanted to make sure you got this message below, and then it'll look like a forwarded message. I've seen some people do sent from my iPhone at the bottom of their marketing emails, which obviously these emails were not sent from their iPhone.
But if you have a reputation, eventually those tactics don't work at all.
They start to fail. A lot of these people have a very pump and dump mentality of get as many people through the system. Some will buy, most won't, and just keep rinsing and repeating. But yeah, if you had the attitude like I think you and I do of the 8-year time horizon.
I don't want the 8-year time horizon.
Yeah, but I think it's one of these things where people are getting more savvy, or I'd like to think people are getting more savvy about how this all works. You're always going to get the people fall for any scammers and this and that. But I think the people I'm trying to attract, my thinking is I want to make it so when they are talking to me about buying, I want it to be a very easy conversation. I want it to be a very simple decision for them, where all the trust building stuff, the can I learn from Brennan? Is he legitimate? Can he help? Has he helped people like me? I want all of that out of the way long before they're even thinking about buying. Because the last thing you want to do is educate somebody about a problem and convince them to pay to solve that problem simultaneously. So if I can do the education stuff in advance, give out free content, give out really good content that people love, they keep wanting to read it. The subject, yeah, it does matter, but ultimately what's going to get them to open is, oh, this is another email from Brennan. When he sends me emails, I tend to learn something. So I'm going to open it. I'm going to read it. And that's my attitude toward this. But yeah, there's a million ways to do it. And again, some of them are a little less reputable than I think what you and I do, but they do work.
Is there any generational aspect to email right now? Are 20-somethings using email the same way as 50, 60, 70-somethings?
I wish I knew. A lot of people say that kids or teenagers don't have email or don't use email. If I think about my own stuff, I got an email address when I went to college. That's the first time I think I had a real one. And it was just an fsu.edu address. And I think you went to Florida State too, didn't you? From what I remember.
I did.
So I got the FSU email. And that was the first real email I had. And I was an idiot and used it for PayPal and stuff, not ever thinking one day I won't be at FSU anymore, but oh well. And then obviously I got into the job market, and that meant getting on these job sites, which it's all done over email. You sign up for an account with an email address. So I think as kids get off of, say, the social media stuff that they're probably doing now in high school and then get into what we would call the real world, I'd assume, yeah, they're going to start using email then. I don't know if it's generational. I think it's one of these things. Why would a teenager really need email when they can talk to their friends over TikTok or whatever?
By the way, on FSU, I assume, I don't know the story, but given that FSU is relevant again in terms of football, and I'm not a big football watcher, but in the back of my mind, I like to see FSU do well. Somebody down there must have turned on the spigot of dollars. I don't know if there's a new billionaire benefactor or what, because all of a sudden they're winning. And you don't win in college football unless there's a lot of money flowing. So someone decided to flow the money down there in Tallahassee again.
Is that the case? See, I haven't even followed it at all since this was early 2000s. So it's been 20 years since I've even paid attention to it. But I do remember, I think the football coach, Bobby Bowden or something, died.
You're like me. Once you leave and move yourself to somewhere else, some of the things that are important in the States just become less important. And quote, one of my friends in Saigon, an American guy, he calls it sports ball, which is, come on, if you're spending, and look, I've been there, done that, whatever. I've done all of it. Redskins games back in the day, loved it. But at some point in time in life, 8 hours a day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, drunk watching American football is pretty much pathetic. I'm sorry, it is.
I assume it's a bit harder too, considering you're a 12-hour time difference. So for you to watch anything, it would be morning your time or something, which probably doesn't make sense.
It's just a different look. In your world, of course, there's plenty of international football junkies going crazy in the UK.
There are, yes. When the men's team is doing okay-ish in any of the Premier League stuff or World Cup, yeah, they think I'm mad for that.
Let me ask you a big picture question to bring people into your thinking also. Audience building. What are some of the tips and tricks and understandings before someone's read your book to get them to understand, look, you put up an email list where you're trying to gather emails, you tell people to subscribe, whatever technology you use to do that. That's pretty daunting because what happens if only 5 people subscribe in the first week or something? You've got a very small list and then one leaves, you've only got 4. How does an average person that's new to your world start to come into the idea of building up a list of people beyond all the basics that go back time immemorial to where it's okay, if you're going to build a business, you got to do this, you got to reach out. It takes time. You got to really get busy. But how do you bring people into the idea of building their email list to share the information they want to share with their customers and potential customers?
That's a great question. And the answer has changed over the years, I think, because nowadays there's a few more strategies and tactics that people are using. But the ultimate thing that I think is unchanging is you need to have something to offer. No one wakes up and says, I wish I got more email today. So you need to have a compelling reason, I think, for why should people tune in? Why should they follow you? And ultimately, I think consistency in really owning whatever world you work in and live in is key. Saying the same thing again and again and again, and finding platforms that are really good for distribution. So I think when I started out for one of my early businesses, it was one on freelancing. I did a lot of blogging. No one was reading it. Went to an empty WordPress blog. And I realized, yeah, maybe Google will send traffic, but with Google, it's a bit of a chicken and egg where they want your website to have authority, as they call it, before they're going to start doing that. What I ended up doing was back then, I started just getting involved in online forums where people were talking about freelancing. And I would answer in a paragraph or two, but then I would link to my substantial in-depth answer, which would be on my blog. And I just did that again. And it was kind of like, in video game terms, grinding. And I just kept doing the same thing again and again and again. And yeah, eventually I got to, say, 1,000 people on the list, and that was a really big milestone. And then I kept doing that again and again and again. It's 2,000. And then eventually Google was like, oh, people are pointing to his website. Maybe we should take him as an authority in freelancing. And then before I knew it, I started getting search traffic. So I think you've got the website angle, which I think a lot of people jump too prematurely to, where they just think I'm just going to post content and somehow the Google fairies will shower me with traffic or whatever, which doesn't usually happen that way. So typically what people are doing these days is they're going to a platform with distribution potential like social media platforms like YouTube or something like that. And they're creating good content. They're being consistent at it. They're publishing daily, weekly, whatever the interval is. But the big thing is the good ones are pointing people off platform onto their list. So they're basically using all of these as ingestion channels onto their main thing, which is their email list. And when I started out back with my, again, agency 15 years ago, how we did that is we got involved, sounds tacky, but our Chamber of Commerce, and they asked, hey, would you give a little presentation on building custom software and what that means for local businesses like law firms and stuff in our area? So I did that. And then at the end, I just said, hey, if you want to find out more, the little fishbowl, put your business card in. And that was the beginning of my email list. I just had 10 people put their business card at the end of this small little talk that I gave.
Like you said, you got to start and you got to grind. And there you go.
Exactly. You just keep doing that again and again and again.
I got to share with you, over the years doing this podcast, many people start to pitch me. And this opens up a little bit of a conversation to you because you talk about pitching in your work. So I have many people that pitch me on podcast guests. Some of them, I never knew who the hell they were. One particular PR firm, and they have probably sent me who knows how many guests, including billionaire entrepreneurs, Nobel Prize winners, and stuff like that. And then, of course, a lot of the big publishers from New York will continually pitch me. And they're pretty close to knowing where I am and what I want. And I'll turn down some, but I'll accept some. I don't know, maybe I accept 60 or 70%. It seems like less these days, but then I'll get pitches from people that I don't know. And I actually open these emails because the experience with the first two that I just mentioned to you have been so positive. So I'll open some of these pitches from, let's say, PR firms that are pitching me guests that I don't know who they are. But some of these, my gosh, have you even listened to or read anything? The answer is no, of course, that I've done. But I'll open up an email and I'll be like, oh, Mike, we'd like to offer you this professor from XYZ University who is a gender studies professor who will explain to you why there are now 17 million genders in this world. And can't you wait to have this person onto your podcast? I'm just thinking, how the hell? Now, there is a side of me where I actually accept some of these.
I was going to say,
I've accepted a couple because there's the side of me that's, ooh, this could be a little bit fun. And I have one of those coming up. It was an SJW professor, and bless him, but we were on very different sides of the equation, and it got a little dicey. But I can't do that all the time. It's just interesting on the pitch part where some people really do the work and they get that a guy like me is open to being pitched. And then some people don't know their blank from a blank in the ground and they pitch me crazy stuff.
Well, that's the thing. That's, I think, why personalization does so well. When you get the templated thing that they sent to literally everyone with a heartbeat that has no customization. I get this all the time where it'll be somebody pitches me cold outreach multiple times a day. And for the various businesses I have. And sometimes it'll be a straight up competitor pitching me. And it's like, I know I'm a part of some CSV spreadsheet that you bought. I get that. I know you're not going through with a fine tooth comb and removing people. But I think that the backfiring, the reputational side effects of doing that end up being, I think, probably pretty costly. Other people might counter me and say, well, at the end of the day, who cares? Again, it's a numbers game. It's like the pickup artist types who just try to pitch everyone who walks by and they know they've got a 0.1% conversion rate, but that's fine. It's a numbers game.
But you don't want to waste time, though. None of us want to waste time.
They're not emailing you individually. They're loading you up in a massive spreadsheet.
But I'm saying for you to open that email, if it's just crap, just waste your time.
Oh, absolutely. Which is why they effectively ruin it for the rest of us. Because if I'm pitching myself on a podcast and I go in and research the person and I say, oh, I know these people that you've interviewed already, they can vouch for me. That gets lost with the rest of the gunk. That's always the issue. But again, I think, if you open an email, even if you don't know the person, if they can grab your attention, if they say, look, Mike, huge fan of your podcast. Hey, I know these people. If it just shows that they spend at least 2 minutes Googling you or browsing your website, that's usually all it takes to at least get you to at least pay them some degree of attention. But yeah, the bar is so low is what I'm trying to get across. Whether they're pitching development services or podcast guests or whatever, the bar is very, very low. And if you can just think, how do I make my messaging a little more relevant? That can get you pretty far.
Let me ask one last question. It's, again, one of these big picture things, and people are going to have to dig into your work, dig into your world. But as you say in your subtitle, at the right time, get people to understand that concept the at the right time part. Bring them into, if they're going to go down the rabbit hole of thinking, hold on, I never even thought about sending my email at the right time. What the hell does that mean? How do you start to unpack that for people?
I think a lot of us will think, okay, my target demographic or something is somebody who fits a certain profile. So if we could just get them in front of our offer, we're golden. If I can just say, look, I'm a website designer, all I need to do is find people who have websites and boom, get them in front of my website, talks about how great of a designer I am. Perfect. But the at the right time angle, what that is just because somebody fits the profile of your perfect customer, it doesn't mean that they're ready and receptive to what you have to offer them. So I think what a lot of us miss is that in order for somebody to be ready, what goes through a company that is deciding to redesign their website? Well, they need to decide their current website is failing them somehow, so they need to fire it. And then they think, well, is it because of the design or is it because of maybe the copywriting's bad? Maybe the ad campaigns bringing people to the website, maybe they're bad. They need to decide what is it. So let's say they settle on design. And then they needed to think, okay, well, how do we go about fixing that? Do we buy a template? Do we go to an agency? Do we find a freelancer? What do we do? And usually there's a very big internal process that needs to occur in order for them to get to the point of being receptive and ready to be pitched on web design. You just can't say, I'm a web designer, you have a website that's, say, ugly. Therefore, you know implicitly why you need to hire me. And I think the mistake is a lot of people just make that jump. If there's one thing, so I went to, after Florida State, I went to St. John's College up in Maryland to study the classics, basically. Read a lot of Plato, which is all about the adventures of Socrates, walking around Athens. And really, one thing that stuck with me ever since was he called himself a philosophical midwife, where he thought of himself as, well, I want somebody to come to this understanding. So he wanted to sell them on an idea. So his thing was, if he could use what is now called Socratic questioning to chaperone them, or as he put it, be a midwife to getting them to the point of being ready and receptive, that was his job, is to be the courier, if you will, of bringing them from here to there. My thinking is, how do we do the same thing? How do we chaperone somebody from where they might be today, which is my website's perfectly fine. It's probably converting as best as it can. There's probably no reason to be thinking about a redesign. I just had a redesign done 2 years ago. Why would I even need something new? And that's where we can come in and using education, using authority, educate them about reasons why some websites convert better than others and explain different case studies and show different examples and this and that, and bring them to the point of having them self-assess the fact that maybe their current website is not cutting it and it's inefficient and it's costing them money and all that good stuff. That's what I'm getting at, is if we can not just acquire leads, but also put them through intentionally designed tracks that are designed to get somebody to be both problem and product aware, to get them to realize that there is an issue, to realize that that issue can be solved. It can be solved by somebody like you. At that point, then they're going to be receptive to what you have to sell to them. And that's what I'm getting across with that is, don't just jump the gun. Don't just assume this is my target audience, so I just need a pitch and perfect.
We have to talk every year, and we should just pick a topic, a very narrow topic, because you really have so much experience in this area. And I think people don't think about this stuff much. The big companies, Amazon, of course, the Googles, they've got massive staffs. But the people that are trying to run their life with the least amount of overhead, which, because frankly, that's the best way to lead a life, we don't think about the nitty gritty enough. Maybe we'll get what we think is good enough, and then we rest on our laurels. And that's just not the way to do it. And you have great insights, even in this conversation. The way you say things always make me think, I got to fix that. I got to reconsider how I'm doing something. Even though I've been doing this forever, there's always a better way. The book, This is Personal, The Art of Delivering the Right Email at the Right Time. Brennan, where can people find you?
thisispersonalbook.com is a little website that links to Amazon and Target and all the different places that sell the book. So if you want to get the book, head there. Otherwise, the best place would be createandsell.co. And that's my weekly, or actually twice weekly now, newsletter on all things what we've been talking about for the last hour. So I just go in depth. If you're okay and receptive to not motivational, but very in-depth and sometimes geeky discussions on why people buy and how to use technology to get more people to buy, then I think you might like that email list.
Cool stuff. I will get on it for sure. Sir, again, like I said, let's make sure we figure out a way to be on each other's calendar for one of these conversations once a year. I always enjoy them.
Yes, please. Yeah, let's do that. And Mike, enjoy the rest of your time in the States.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.